Welcome to Nightmare Fuel Stories. The lighthouse at Blackrock Point. The first time I saw a ghost ship, I didn't know what I was looking at. It was my third week as keeper at Blackrock Point Lighthouse, and I was still getting used to the isolation. The beam swept out across the dark water, and there, just at the edge of visibility, was a silhouette that shouldn't have been there. A three-masted schooner, sails full despite the dead calm that had settled over the bay. I blinked, and it was gone. I chalked it up to exhaustion. The transition from city life to lighthouse keeper had been more jarring than I'd anticipated. After my wife Sarah's death, I needed something different, something far from the sympathetic glances of friends and the emptiness of our apartment. When the coastal authority position opened up, it seemed like providence. "You understand it's remote," the hiring manager had said, studying my application with skeptical eyes. "Most keepers don't last more than a season." "I need remote," I'd replied. 3 weeks in, and I was beginning to understand why turnover was high. The isolation was absolute. Blackrock Point jutted into the Atlantic like a gnarled finger, with the lighthouse perched at its very tip. The nearest town, Havensport, was 15 miles down a winding coastal road, impassable in bad weather, which was frequent in this part of Maine. The lighthouse itself was old, built in 1887 and only partially modernized. The beacon was automated, but regulations required a human presence for maintenance and monitoring. The keeper's quarters were surprisingly spacious: kitchen, living area, 2 bedrooms, and an office, all built into the circular base of the tower. I tried to establish a routine. Mornings for maintenance checks, afternoons for record keeping and my own writing projects, evenings for reading or listening to the shortwave radio. Nights were the hardest. I'd climb the spiral staircase to the lantern room and watch the beam cut through the darkness, slicing the night into predictable segments. 1 week after seeing the phantom schooner, I saw it again. This time I was certain I wasn't hallucinating. The ship moved against the wind, its sails billowing toward shore while the whitecaps pushed out to sea. I grabbed the binoculars kept in the lantern room and focused on the vessel. What I saw made my blood run cold. The deck was empty, no crew visible anywhere. The wood of the hull was weathered beyond what seemed possible, with great patches missing as though the sea had eaten through it. Yet it stayed afloat, moving steadily through waters that should have swamped it instantly. I lowered the binoculars, my hands trembling. When I looked again with my naked eye, the ship was gone. That night I couldn't sleep. I scoured the lighthouse's logbooks, some dating back decades, looking for any mention of phantom ships. Most entries were mundane: weather reports, maintenance notes, supply requests. But in a logbook from 1973 I found something. April 17, observed vessel matching description of the Eliza Jane, lost 1892, 3 miles offshore. Reported to Coast Guard. No vessel found during search. April 20, Eliza Jane sighted again. No response to radio or light signals. April 21, found drowned sailor on rocks below lighthouse. Clothing consistent with late 19th century maritime wear. Body taken to Havensport for identification. The entries continued for another week, with 3 more sightings of the Eliza Jane, then abruptly stopped. The next entry, dated May 15, was in different handwriting, a new keeper. I spent the rest of the night researching the Eliza Jane on my laptop, using the lighthouse's painfully slow satellite internet. The ship had indeed existed, a trading vessel that disappeared off the Maine coast in 1892 with all hands. The prevailing theory was that it struck the treacherous rocks around Blackrock Point during a storm. The next morning I drove into Havensport for supplies and information. The town was small, just a few streets of weathered buildings facing the harbor. The Historical Society operated out of an old sea captain's house on the main street. The curator, a retired professor named Eleanor Marsh, seemed unsurprised by my questions about ghost ships. "Blackrock has always had stories," she said, leading me through narrow rooms filled with maritime artifacts. "Most keepers report something unusual sooner or later. What about the Eliza Jane?" I asked. She paused, her hand resting on a glass case containing a ship in a bottle. "That's a persistent one. Been sighted off and on for over a century. And the keeper in 1973, the logbook entries just stopped." Eleanor's face tightened. "Martin Coles, he disappeared during a storm. The Coast Guard found the lighthouse empty, dinner half-eaten on the table, logbook open. They never found his body." A chill ran through me. "What do you think happened to him, officially?" "He was swept off the rocks during the storm." She gave me a penetrating look. "Unofficially, there are those who say he answered a call from the sea." "What does that mean?" Instead of answering, she unlocked a cabinet and removed a small, leather-bound journal. This was Martin's personal diary. His family donated it after losing hope he'd be found. "It's not part of our public collection." She handed it to me. "Return it when you're done, and Daniel, be careful what you look for at Blackrock." Sometimes the sea gives back what it takes, but it's never in the form we want. I read the journal that night, sitting in the lantern room while the beam swept across the dark waters. Martin Coles had been a methodical man, recording daily observations alongside his official logs. The entries began normally enough: complaints about the isolation, notes about wildlife weather patterns. Then, about 2 months in, March 30, 1973, dreamed of Sarah again. She was standing on the rocks below the lighthouse, calling my name. Woke up on the stairs, must have been sleepwalking. This is happening more frequently. I froze. Sarah, my wife's name. A coincidence, surely. The entries grew increasingly disturbed. April 15, the dreams are getting worse. Sarah is always by the water now, beckoning. Sometimes I see others with her, sailors in old-fashioned clothes. They want me to join them, but something holds me back. April 17, saw a ship today that shouldn't exist. The Eliza Jane, I'm certain of it. Reported to Coast Guard, but they found nothing. Am I losing my mind? April 20. Sarah spoke to me today, not in dreams, but while I was awake. Her voice came over the radio during my weather check. She said, "The ships need a guide, Martin. They're lost without you." The final entry was dated April 28, 1973. They're coming for me tonight. The Eliza Jane is just the beginning. There are others, so many others, lost in the dark. Sarah says I can help them find their way home. I understand now why I was called to Blackrock. The lighthouse has always needed a special kind of keeper. That was it. Whatever happened to Martin Coles after that went unrecorded. I closed the journal, unsettled. The coincidence of his wife sharing a name with mine was disturbing enough, but the content of his delusions struck too close to home. I'd taken this job to escape my grief, not to have it follow me. That night I dreamed of Sarah for the first time since coming to Blackrock. She stood on the rocks below the lighthouse, her dark hair whipping in the wind. The dream was so vivid I could smell the salt air, feel the spray on my face. "They need you, Daniel," she said, her voice somehow carrying over the crash of waves. "They're lost without a guide." I woke up on the stairs leading down to the ground level door, exactly as Martin had described in his journal. Moonlight filtered through the small windows, illuminating the worn steps beneath my bare feet. I had no memory of leaving my bed. The next day, I called the Coastal Authority and requested information about previous keepers at Blackrock. The administrator seemed reluctant, but eventually emailed me a list dating back to 1950. I scanned the names and tenures, looking for patterns. Most keepers stayed 1 or 2 years, typical for such an isolated post. But every decade or so, there was a keeper who lasted only months, with their departure marked by an asterisk. The footnote simply read, "Terminated circumstances undocumented." Martin Coles was one of these. So was Thomas Whitfield, 1963, James Harrington, 1981, and most recently, Rebecca Chen, 2002. I searched online for any information about these keepers. Thomas Whitfield and James Harrington were both listed as missing, presumed dead in newspaper archives. Rebecca Chen's case had more detail. She disappeared during a clear night, with the lighthouse in perfect working order. Her final log entry noted unusual vessels in the bay. That evening, as dusk settled over the water, I saw not one but 3 ships on the horizon, each from a different era. A schooner I assumed was the Eliza Jane, a steam-powered vessel from perhaps the early 20th century, and what looked like a modern fishing trawler, listing heavily to one side. I watched them through the binoculars, my heart pounding. None had visible crew, all moved against the natural currents and wind. As the lighthouse beams swept over them, they seemed to flicker, becoming momentarily transparent before solidifying again. I grabbed my phone and took photos, but when I checked the images, they showed only empty water. That night the dreams intensified. Sarah stood on the rocks with others, a man in a captain's coat, a woman in modern clothes I somehow knew was Rebecca Chen, and Martin Coles, identifiable from a photo I'd seen in his journal. "The lost ships need a beacon," Sarah said, "a special kind of light only you can provide." I woke again on the stairs, this time much closer to the door. My hand was outstretched toward the knob. The next day I drove to Havensport in a panic and showed Alina the journal. "Did you know about this?" I demanded. "About the pattern of disappearances." She sighed heavily. "There are stories about Blackrock that go back to before the lighthouse was built. The indigenous people called it the place where the veil is thin. What veil? Between our world and whatever comes after. The waters around Blackrock have claimed hundreds of ships over the centuries. Some say those ships are still trying to find safe harbor. And they need a guide, a keeper." My voice sounded strangled even to my own ears. Alina nodded slowly. "The lighthouse was built to prevent shipwrecks, but some say it serves another purpose, helping those already lost find their way. To where? Beyond," she shrugged. "Heaven, the afterlife, whatever you want to call it. The ships are trapped, Daniel, caught between worlds, and they need someone who understands loss to guide them." "Like someone who's lost a spouse," I said flatly. Her eyes widened. "You too." I didn't know every keeper who disappeared had lost someone, I realized aloud. That's the pattern. Elinor didn't confirm or deny it, but her expression told me everything. I need to leave, I said. Today, the authority won't have a replacement for weeks, she reminded me, and if you abandon your post, she didn't need to finish. I'd lose my job, my income, and with my savings depleted from months of grieving and not working after Sarah's death, I'd have nowhere to go. I returned to the lighthouse that evening, determined to resist whatever was happening. I took precautions, locked the door to the stairs, swallowed 2 sleeping pills, and tied a rope from my ankle to the bedpost. None of it mattered. I woke standing on the rocks below the lighthouse, waves crashing around my knees. The rope dangled from my ankle, cleanly cut. Above me, the lighthouse beam swept uselessly across the water, because the real beacon, I somehow understood, was meant to be me. Sarah stood in the water before me, more solid and real than she'd been in any dream. Behind her, stretching to the horizon, were ships of all kinds, sailing vessels, steamers, modern boats, hundreds of them crowding the bay. They've been waiting so long, she said, extending her hand. We need to show them the way home. You're not real, I said, even as I felt the cold water numbing my feet. You're not Sarah, her expression softened with such familiar compassion that my heart ached. I am Daniel. Part of me has been here since I died, waiting for you. The sea connects all things, the living and the dead, this world and the next. I don't understand what you want from me. The lighthouse has always needed a special kind of keeper, she explained, echoing Martin's final words. Someone who knows what it means to be lost, someone who can see beyond the veil because grief has already shown them the way. The ships behind her began to glow with a soft, otherworldly light. I could see figures on their decks now, sailors, passengers, children, all watching me expectantly. If I do this, I said, my voice breaking, will I see you again, the real you? Sarah smiled. I never left you, Daniel. I've been trying to reach you since I died, but you closed yourself off. It took coming here to this thin place for you to finally hear me. I looked up at the lighthouse, its beams still sweeping the physical world, unseeing of the spectral armada gathered in the bay. Then I looked back at Sarah, at her outstretched hand. What happens to me if I help them? You become the keeper of both worlds, she said. The beacon for the living and the guide for the lost. It's a lonely calling, but not an eternal one. Eventually, someone will come to replace you, as you've come to replace those before. I thought of Martin Coles, of Rebecca Chen, of all the others who had stood where I now stood. Had they found peace in their choice? Or were they trapped like the ships they sought to guide? I need time to think, I said, stepping back from the water. Sarah nodded, understanding in her eyes. Time works differently here, but yes, you can have that. When you're ready, you'll know how to call us. I blinked, and I was alone on the rocks, the spectral ships gone. Above me, the lighthouse continued its endless vigil, indifferent to my crisis. The next week passed in a fog of indecision. I performed my duties mechanically, checking equipment, logging weather conditions, reporting to the authority. At night, I watched the waters, but the ghost ships didn't return. Neither did Sarah. I read and reread Martin's journal, looking for clues about what had really happened to him and the others. Had they drowned, as the official reports suggested, or had they crossed over somehow, becoming part of whatever existed beyond the veil? On the 7th night, I made my decision. I climbed to the lantern room and switched off the automated system. The beam died, plunging the point into darkness for the first time in over a century. I'm ready, I said to the empty air. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the waters of the bay began to glow with an ethereal light that rose from the depths. Ship after ship materialized, not just the 3 I'd seen before, but hundreds, perhaps thousands, stretching to the horizon. Vessels from every era crowded the bay, their phantom lights casting an unearthly luminescence over the water. On the rocks below, figures gathered, men and women in clothing from across the centuries. I recognized Sarah among them, standing beside Martin Coles and the others who had kept the lighthouse before me. I made my way down the spiral staircase and out onto the rocks. The spectral congregation parted as I approached, creating a path to where Sarah stood. You understand now? She asked. I nodded. The lighthouse was never just for the living. It's a waypoint, a crossing, for ships lost in the fog between worlds, she confirmed. They need a keeper who can see both sides, someone to light the way home. And that's me now, if you choose it. I looked back at the darkened lighthouse, then out at the countless vessels waiting in the glowing waters. What do I need to do? Sarah took my hand, her touch surprisingly solid. Become the light. She led me to the water's edge, where Martin Coles stood beside a small rowboat. It's not so bad, he said, seeing my hesitation. Lonely sometimes, but meaningful. You'll guide thousands home. Will I ever cross over myself? I asked. He smiled enigmatically. When your replacement comes, that's how it works. One keeper passes the duty to the next and finally finds rest. I stepped into the boat. Sarah and Martin pushed it into the water, then climbed in after me. As we rowed toward the first of the waiting ships, I felt a strange transformation beginning. my body becoming less substantial, more luminous. "It's starting," Sarah said, watching me with a mixture of sadness and pride. "Your light is growing." I looked down and saw that my skin was indeed glowing, emitting a warm radiance that strengthened with each passing moment. The light spread outward, illuminating the water around our small boat. The nearest ghost ship, the Eliza Jane, lowered a spectral ladder. As I climbed aboard, my transformation completed. I was now a being of pure light, a human lighthouse. From the deck, I could see hundreds of faces watching me, the lost crews of countless shipwrecks, waiting for guidance. I raised my arms, and the light within me intensified, becoming a beacon that shone in all directions. One by one, the ships began to move, following my light toward a horizon that seemed to open into another realm entirely, a place of peace beyond the mortal world. As the procession of vessels moved forward, I understood that this would be my existence now, standing between worlds, guiding the lost to their final harbor. Not forever, someday, a new keeper would come to Blackrock Point, someone else who understood loss deeply enough to see beyond the veil. Until then, I would be the lighthouse keeper of Blackrock Point by day, maintaining the physical beacon for the living. And by night, I would become the light itself, guiding the spectral ships to their eternal rest. It was a lonely calling, but not without purpose, not without peace, and Sarah would be with me, at least for a time, until she too found her final crossing. As the last of the waiting ships followed my light toward the other side, I felt a profound sense of rightness settle over me. This was why I had been drawn to Blackrock Point, not to escape my grief, but to transform it into something that could help others find their way home. The physical lighthouse still stands on Blackrock Point. Its automated beam still sweeps the waters each night, warning living ships away from the treacherous rocks. But if you look carefully, on certain nights when the veil grows thin, you might see another light moving across the bay, a warmer, stranger radiance that calls not to the living, but to those already lost. That light is me, and I will guide you home.